For the 8th.
When we're not afraid
Yes,
to walk
it's
alone. Let's keep on marching for justice. Each step will wear away the stone. Oh, can you hear? And can you hear? We'll all be singing for joy in peace and harmony. Yes, peace and harmony. Oh, can you hear? And can you hear? We'll all be singing for joy in peace and harmony. Yes, peace and harmony. Oh, can you hear? Can you hear? We'll all be singing for joy.
Are we muted? I don't think we are.
Peace and harmony.
A lot of people in
Good
this.
evening, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Julie Enzer, and I'd like to welcome you to Sinister Wisdom's discussion of the Lexington Six by Josephine Donovan, as well as activism in Kentucky.
Yes.
To open, I think I got muted a bit, so you might have lost a bit of it, but to open this event, we played the song Peace and Harmony by Kentucky-based songwriter Carol Kramer, performed by Your Girlfriend and produced by Esther Records. You can listen to this song and 3 others by Kramer at sinisterwisdom.org/yourgirlfriend. As we begin, I'd like to ask everyone to mute their microphones. People who are co-hosts, if you would mute people as you see them pop up at the top of the screen, that means that we're hearing their microphone. As we begin this evening, I'm happy to welcome you, and I want to acknowledge that we are all situated in different places coming together tonight, and all of us on land that historically is not ours. I am in the Sinister Wisdom office, which is located on land that historically belonged to the Seminole people. I ask us that we all take a moment to acknowledge the land we are on and the indigenous peoples who lived here previously. Thank you. Tonight, we are thrilled to welcome Josephine Donovan, author of this amazing new book, The Lexington Six. Josephine will be in conversation this evening with Cate Fosl, and their discussion will be followed by a wonderful panel. I am thrilled that you have joined us. And if you heard in the background, that was lightning in Florida. We may have a wonderful thunderstorm tonight. We have a full hour planned. We will wrap up around 8 o'clock on the East Coast, including time for a traditional dance number at the end. Very quickly, if you're not familiar with Sinister Wisdom is a quarterly journal of lesbian literature and art. If you're not currently a subscriber, I encourage you to sign up for the subscription today by going to sinisterwisdom.org/subscribe. I also invite people to become monthly sustainers. I send emails every month when sustainer gifts arrive with behind the scenes details and new information about what we have coming. I thank you for joining us on behalf of the Sinister Wisdom Board of Directors, and I appreciate the many ways that lesbians lift up and support the work of Sinister Wisdom. I'm also incredibly grateful this evening that we had the co-sponsorship of the Fairness Alliance in Kentucky, and I'm getting that name wrong, so somebody would put it in the chat, that would help. And also the support of the Anne Braden Institute for Social Justice Research. They were instrumental in helping bring together the event and our speakers. So I have just a few housekeeping notes before we begin our event this evening. First, as I've said already, please keep your microphone muted. If we detect noise from you, we will mute you. I encourage people, as they've already started, to put information into the chat. I'm including the correction of the Fairness Campaign, which is based in Louisville, Kentucky. I remember an old name of an earlier iteration of it. So thank you to the Fairness Campaign. As the program proceeds, show appreciation for the discussion and particular comments. You can use reaction emojis on Zoom. You are free to test those out now and continue to put things in the chat. Also, if you have questions for Josephine or panelists, please put those in the chat and we will lift those up as the evening goes on. If you need technical assistance, you can chat with a brand new summer intern from Sinister Wisdom, Noelle Barrera. Noelle is joining us from Houston. She's on her way to graduate school in New York and working with Sinister Wisdom and providing technical assistance this evening. We are, I'm double checking, recording the event. Yes. Many of you know I've sometimes forgotten to do that. So we are recording it. We will make the recording available tomorrow or Thursday at sinisterwisdom.org/SW121. Those are my announcements. Now on to our program. I am so delighted this evening to welcome Josephine Donovan, who said yes when I emailed her out of the blue about her fabulous book, The Lexington Six. Josephine Donovan is the author of 9 books of nonfiction and the editor of 5. Her fields of specialization include animal ethics, feminist criticism and theory, American women's literature, especially 19th century American women's literature, and early modern women's literature. The Lexington Six, her most recent book, which was a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award, is the subject of our conversation tonight, and we're very excited to talk about it. Josephine will be in conversation with Cate Fosl. Cate is a historian and professor of women's gender and sexuality studies at the University of Louisville, where she also directs the Anne Braden Institute for Social Justice Research. Please join me in giving a warm Sinister Wisdom welcome to Josephine and Cate. And I am getting ready to pin. I've pinned Josephine and I am now looking for Cate, and we'll add a pin so that you can see both of them. But Cate and Josephine, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm looking forward to your conversation.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And Josephine, I'm really excited to talk with you about this really wonderful new book, the culmination of a longtime project for you, I think, and a very important piece of underknown, under-recognized local and national history that you've excavated. So we've got a lot to cover in a short interview. Let's get right to it. I would love for you to just start us off by giving just a brief summary of the basics of the story of the Lexington Six.
Well, the basic story begins in May and June of 1974, when 2 fugitives arrived in Lexington. These were 2 lesbians who had been involved in a bank robbery in Boston in 1970 and had been on the run since then. And they had been placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. And so they arrived in Lexington under pseudonyms and in disguise, and they befriended a number of women in the lesbian feminist community, but no one in the community knew who they were, and never did, in fact, know who they were, and got to know them under their pseudonyms. And so they remained in Lexington for several months, and then they sort of suddenly disappeared. And shortly thereafter, the FBI got wind of the fact that they had been in Lexington and or were still there as the FBI suspected. And so the FBI moved in January of 1975 and began interrogating members of the community quite aggressively and invasively. And so many members of the community refused to cooperate with them, given the rather intrusive and bullying behavior of the FBI. And for this, they were subpoenaed before a federal grand jury and eventually held in contempt of court and sent to Kentucky County jails for varying lengths of time. One of the Lexington Six ended up spending over a year in a Kentucky County jail. And I might say that when they sent them off to the jails, they put them in chains, which was sort of the ultimate indignity, as you can imagine, horrifying to see. And so they spent several weeks up to a year in the jails. And that's the essence of the story.
Thank you. Well, if for those of you who read the book or haven't read it and will read it, and I highly recommend it, you hear a lot about the very harsh treatment that these very young activists receive. And I think it's worth taking a moment, Josephine, if you will, to, sort of reconstruct for us a bit of the atmosphere in Lexington, in Kentucky, in the mid-70s. I mean, especially surrounding being a feminist, being lesbian, being a queer person, but being a progressive activist generally. I mean, this was an era of a lot of ferment, but a lot of repression. This was also the same year that the Joanne Little case happened. Yes. In North Carolina, and you do talk about that in your book. Could you, just for people of different generations that might be here with us, can you recreate that a bit for us?
Well, to be a lesbian or a gay man in Lexington in 1975 was really to have an identity that was despised by most people. And it was very scary to be outed in any way. And of course, this whole publicity that surrounded the case effectively outed all of the Lexington Six. That was part of the ordeal that was even almost as bad as being sent to jail. But and the FBI outed many of them to their parents and to relatives, to friends, to employers. And in those days, I mean, being outed was really a scary thing because, as I say, it was not a popular identity to have. So it was an ordeal on those grounds as well. And of course, Lexington, Kentucky in general, is a fairly conservative state. And so to be in the anti-war movement or in any progressive movement was already, a stigma that could bring, could, in the worst case, bring violence against you, as several of the gay men experienced for just being gay. So it was rough to be a lesbian or a gay man at that time.
Thank you. What
and
would
by
you
the
say?
way, if employers found out about it, they could fire you. I mean, so you risk losing your job. And of course, basically it was illegal in Kentucky. So if you could be sent to jail just for being lesbian or gay. So it wasn't until much later that those laws were overturned in Kentucky and then finally, nationally.
And
In fact, it wasn't
we're
until the
still
21st.
struggling for a statewide fairness law, I might add. That's a big part of our movement here still, though a lot of, counties and municipalities do have protections. And I mean, I think we could all agree we've come a long way, but we're still struggling on that front. What would you say? Well, one thing I just want to take us back to was just, I mean, I was really struck by the way that the FBI outed people, even in their quest to track them down. They told their grandmothers that they were gay or lesbian. They really were very intrusive and bullying, as you point out. Well, so that was one of the issues at stake. What were some of the other issues at stake in that case, in the stand that the Lexington Six took?
What was there? Were the other what?
The issues at stake.
Oh, well, originally, of course, the members of, I mean, the six that became the Lexington Six, I mean, were feeling a kind of loyalty to the two fugitives that they had known as friends, and they felt a certain political solidarity with them. So there was that element. But I think eventually it was their sense of just indignation at the way they were being treated that it was ultimately the underlying animus for why they continued to resist. But at the same time, the legal issue that became prominent was that of grand jury abuse. And it was clear in this case that the grand jury was being misused as an arm, really, of the FBI. And that is not a proper role for a grand jury. And even the grand jurors themselves saw themselves as having the purpose of finding the two fugitives. And that is the job of the FBI, not the job of the grand jury. The grand jury's job is to bring an indictment for a crime. Well, the two fugitives had already been indicted in other jurisdictions, so there was no question of them being indicted by the Lexington grand jury. So basically there was no purpose to the Lexington grand jury, the federal grand jury, other than to help the FBI find those two fugitives. And so the whole case legally was related to this abusive use of the grand jury, and that really unconstitutional use of the grand jury. But that was not ultimately the primary motive of the Lexington Six themselves. As I say, their primary motive was loyalty to one another and to their friends. And, and then just in a sense of political solidarity. And then this sense of indignation and outrage, really, at the way they were being treated.
Yes, the whole thing, as their treatment unfolded, it seemed like a politicizing experience in and of itself.
Well, most of them were pretty political to begin with. I mean, they were all very devout feminists. The one who was educated the most, I think, was Carrie Junkin, the gay guy, and he claimed that he learned a lot from the women about feminism and racism and other things, and even gay issues. And but the women themselves, I think, were I would fairly quite politically astute, actually. So, but what they learned about was the technicalities of how the grand jury is being misused, and of course, like myself, just preparing research on the book, I mean, I learned a lot about federal civil and legal procedures. And I mean, they learned that as they went too. So that by the end of it, they were, quite astute on that issue too.
Yes, that's really what I was thinking about in terms of the political odyssey. I think even the attorneys, and they had one of the most prominent civil rights, civil liberties attorneys in the state who had defended earlier defendants like Carl and
Right,
Ann
right,
Braden in their
that's right,
sedition charges years earlier.
right.
They there was real surprise that the charges weren't dropped when the women on the run were, as you say, apprehended and jailed in other states. It would seem that there's no more reason to hold them, but they held them. And so I'd like to ask you to say a little bit more about that sense of like solidarity and especially the issue of sisterhood
Right,
that these women experience, both
right.
with, Saxon power, but especially among each other.
Yeah, I do think sisterhood was, I mean, maybe it's another word for political solidarity among feminists. But there's no question that was well, even the lawyer, Bob Sedler, said he thought sisterhood was the motivating issue, a sense of protecting their women's community from these interlopers that were patriarchal interlopers, you might say, that were invading it. And I think there was that sense of personal invasion and resistance to these guys coming in and treating them shabbily. So sisterhood and also, by the way, one of the FBI agents himself said, he said, you know how those lesbians are, they all stick together. And it was kind of like they were frustrated because they couldn't crack this wall of refusing to cooperate and refusing to testify. And of course, it wasn't just Lexington. I mean, the FBI was all over the place looking for these fugitives. And I mean, so the resistance occurred in several other cities as well, inspired really by the Lexington Six. But so the solidarity and sisterhood was really quite a national phenomenon. I mean, Philadelphia, Boston, and that was very, very important.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Of course, your book presents this, and it is in a very profound way a Kentucky story, but it had national implications, a national network, national tentacles, and really national publicity in terms of this
Yes.
larger both underground and above ground
Right.
network. So do you want to say a little bit about those connections to
Well,
where
that
women were
that was
organized?
something that I learned actually in doing research for the book. I hadn't realized it beforehand, but the Lexington Six really became a kind of model and inspiration for other minority groups that were being harassed by the FBI, and that included Native Americans and Chicano activists, Puerto Rican American activists. I mean, and the FBI, I mean, one can theorize, but they seem to go after groups that they felt were vulnerable in a way. And they also targeted women. There was no question about that. And so vast numbers of these resistors were women from the different groups. And also to give credit where credit is due is the Center for Constitutional Rights and National Lawyers Guild and the New York Grand Jury Project. They kind of stepped in as national organizers. It was really quite an amazing and very rapid organization when you consider that there was no internet and that the phones were tapped. And, it was quite an accomplishment to spread the word the way they did, so that already in Philadelphia, when Susan Sachs was apprehended, which is about a month after the Lexington Six case, Philadelphia was on alert. I mean, and the women in the lesbian community there were prompted or prepped to not to cooperate, and they did not cooperate. So it was a very effective and impressive job of political organizing on the part of these the groups that I just mentioned.
Yes, I see that Marta put in the chat about the vibrant, progressive lesbian feminist community in Lexington. And I have to add that the first time I ever went to Lexington, I think in my life, was in 1989. And I, was told about that case at that time by a
Oh,
group of lesbian feminists that, that the story of that case and
oh,
that solidarity has really persisted. At least it did for a decade or two in Lexington. I'm not sure how much young people today know about it, which is a good reason for having this panel.
uh-huh.
So let me just ask a question that, it's always good to ask a historian this question, like, and you have, I mean, I ask it advisedly, okay, but I would say, like, what lessons, what analogies for today might we draw from this story of the Lexington Six?
Well, I think I hope it stands as a kind of example of people resisting oppression and fascism whenever or wherever it occurs. And it has, as you might know, has not disappeared. And so I think it does stand as a kind of inspiration, hopefully, for people today, and to realize that, that the powers can get out of control, powers that be, and one has to be eternally vigilant, really, to make sure that the laws are obeyed, which they weren't being obeyed in 1975, and that the abusive behavior of police and FBI is called to account.
Yeah, thank you. And that message of, like, standing together and non-cooperation with the police, I think, is still a very relevant message.
Yes, I think so, for sure.
And by the way, two things. We've got a little bit more time left, not much, but there are some people that are going into a bit more detail about the women's experiences. These women, started off as part of the sort of more radical wing of what SDS, Students for Democratic Society, became, and got involved in sort of, revolutionary violence. And so they didn't start off as lesbians. They started off involved with men, at least one of them, and then they fell in love with each other when they went underground. And so then they just really became part of these thriving lesbian feminist communities in all of the various places where they lived underground, because this was not the first, Lexington wasn't the first place they came to, and they could find themselves quickly embraced by those communities. So we only have a couple more minutes, but I think for any writer who goes into the depth that you did in this wonderful book, it's really good to ask you a bit about your sources and, sort of how you wrote the book. Like, tell us a little bit, just a little bit about what was your approach? Who did you talk to? What did you look at?
Well, of course, I was there at the time of the Lexington Six. I was an assistant professor at the University of Kentucky. And so I was aware of so I would say dimly aware of what was going on at the time. Of course, it all happened very quickly from January to March. And so nobody was really clear what was going on, but insofar as anyone was, I was at least somewhat aware. And I did attend the contempt hearings in the Lexington courthouse, and I saw them being carted off to jail, and I visited them in the jails. But for many years, I had in mind writing this book. But it wasn't until a few years ago that some oral history tapes that were made shortly after the whole episode, and they had been deposited in the UK oral history library. They became available to, or some of them at any rate, to, they were opened up to researchers, which they had been closed for many years. And when I found out that those tapes were available, I thought, well, maybe I have something to go on in terms of writing this book, because I couldn't just write it based on my own recollections. So once I got those tapes, and then I began to dig into finding the transcripts of the contempt hearings, which are in national archives around the country, actually. And then I filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the FBI, and was able to get 800 pages of FBI records. It took 2 years to get those, but which were relevant to the case. So I was able to, and then of course I could contact many of the people that were involved, and pull all these threads together. And so I was able to write the book then based on these different sources, which, which filled out the story. So, as well as, of course, doing background research on some of the theoretical matters.
Sure, sure.
And especially, I mean, on legal matters.
Well, it was really a deep labor of love, and that shows. And I'm sorry we didn't have more time to talk about it. I think one of the things, an interesting thing Julie entered into the chat is, how it explores the different ways that activists related to, violence against the state. And there were a lot of points of view on that, but the book deals with that in some depth and in very interesting ways. And that was an interesting moment, of course, with the Weather Underground as the prominent.
It certainly was a hot topic of discussion at the time. And the whole question of the use of violence, I think most, if not all of the Lexington Six were not thrilled by when they did find out about the history of the two fugitives, and especially the death of a policeman that occurred in the Boston robbery, although neither of the women was involved in that. But so there are serious ethical issues there, and were, definitely discussed at the time. But I don't think that the fact that the Lexington Six supported these women necessarily meant that they supported what they did.
No, I thought that was a very interesting part of it, in fact.
But they supported them as friends that they had known, and they supported in general the anti-war movement and of course feminism.
Okay, well, we're about out of time, Josephine, but thank you so much. I really appreciated the conversation. And now I have the honor of introducing Pam McMichael, who's going to moderate the second part of our program. And Pam, who organized a lot of this program tonight, as you know, was born and raised in Kentucky, lived here for most of her life, except during the 12 years when she directed the Highlander Center down in East Tennessee. Pam was a co-founder of the Fairness Campaign here in Louisville, the Southerners on New Ground, which she also co-directed after, in its early iteration. She was a co-founder of the National Surge, showing up for racial justice. And I am proud to call her a friend, and she's an inspiration. As Julie pointed out, she's an inspiration to all of us who do this kind of progressive, intersectional justice work here in Kentucky. Pam, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Kate. And Josephine, thank you for writing this book. And thank you both for the rich conversation we just had. That just so much. And thank you, Julie, for hosting this program tonight at Sinister Wisdom, and for Sinister Wisdom being a lifeline for so many of us during the pandemic. And just welcome and thank you to all of you who've turned in this evening. I'm thrilled to be here with you. For the second half of the program, we are excited to have a panel that will speak some more about Lexington, as well as lesbian rights and organizing across Kentucky. There is I haven't totally been tracking the chat because I'm not as skillful as some are in that, but I know there were rich sharings going on in the chat, which lifted up. There's a long and rich and long resistance and organizing history in this state, from the mountains of Appalachia to our urban centers, in terms of lesbian rights and organizing and the broader queer. Kentucky boasts the smallest municipality in the country that has passed what we in Kentucky call the Fairness Amendment. That's Vico, Kentucky. And also, like many communities, art and culture have been central to our building relationships with each other, building that sisterhood and progressive movements. I want to just lift up a few. Amber Moon Productions out of Lexington, two girl bands, Real World String Band in Lexington and the surrounding areas, and Your Girlfriend, which Julie mentioned at the start, in Louisville, and Robbie Bartlett, African American lesbian community, and the broader African American community. And these bands and these musical production companies and music and art and poetry, these were all so incredibly important for building lesbian community, as well as linked to that broader progressive movements, empowering, connecting, healing, faith in ourselves and each other. And the Fairness Campaign from the start did the work in an intersectional way before that work was ever coined or used. And a lot of people don't know that Louisville had anti-discrimination ordinances based on gender identity before New York or Chicago had it. So there's a long and rich history here. I want to welcome the three panelists who will share some brief snapshot experiences tonight, knowing there are many more stories that each of them have to share, as well as recognizing that there are many great stories with everyone on this call. And first, we're going to stay right in Lexington and hear from Karen Tice. Karen, I was recalling in this, I actually went to my first gay bar in Lexington in the late 70s, and was remembering that. So Karen is a professor of women and gender studies at the University of Kentucky. And Karen is somebody who came to Lexington right after the FBI descended on the community. And then, having lived there all these decades since, just please share with us your observations of the impact of this over time, both in the immediate year and now these many decades later.
Okay, thank you, Pam. I'm really thrilled to be here. Yes, I did move to Lexington in the winter of 1978, and I witnessed firsthand the contradictory and emotional afterlives that the Lexington Six grand jury resistance generated within Lexington's feminist, lesbian, and progressive communities. I was very fortunate in that I met and became dear friends with many members of the Defense Committee early on. The FBI and the courts did leave a legacy of scars, wounds, suspicion, and wariness of outsiders, given their vile history of viciousness and violence in targeting lesbian feminist groups. Yet at the same time that many carried the wounds of this history, there were other after effects of the Lexington Six trials that helped to permanently shape, educate, and energize lesbian feminist activism in Lexington. Armed with many lessons about the power of the state, courts, prisons, policing, and grand juries, many groups and collectives and initiatives were established in Lexington. Among them were Women's Energy, the Amber Moon Collective, Non-Traditional Jobs for Women, Women Inc., the Lexington Women's Center, Gay Service Organization, and the National Lawyers Guild. Members of the Defense Committee many of whom were former Red Star sisters. I have their t-shirt, organized a socialist feminist chapter of the New American Movement and a Lexington Socialist Feminist Union. Others did prison reform organizing at the Lexington Control Unit for political prisoners, organizing against right-wing homophobic groups, strip mining, attending real-world string band rallies and concerts, and creating a variety of different lesbian spaces for dance, discussion, drink, and softball. Throughout the trial, the imprisonment, the defense, and the aftermath of the Lexington Six, many national state solidarities and alliances were forged. Lexington feminists, lesbian activists were active in many national networks and conferences. The resilience and resistance on the part of the various networks involved in the Lexington Six has continued to be a part of a deeply felt history of Lexington activism over time. Last week, I was at a dinner in which a young LGBTQ student activist who had grown up in Lexington mentioned how many whispers and partial stories about the Lexington Six they had heard over the years. They were thrilled to have had the opportunity to read the book as I was. I am really grateful for the preservation of these rich local oppositional legacies that I think can continue to guide our ongoing struggles against right-wing repression. So shout out to Joe, to everybody who was involved and for giving us that kind of amazing sort of memories and activism.
Thank you, Karen. And yes, in my just appreciating the writing of the book and these stories, and I meant to say earlier, just appreciation to the Lexington Six for the stands they took, and the legacy that we and the work that people are still doing, and yeah, just really sitting with that and that in this moment. So thank you, Karen. We're gonna move down the road a little bit. Next, we're going to hear from Marta Miranda Straub. Marta has lived in Lexington, as she mentioned in the chat, and currently lives just outside of Louisville. But when I met Marta, we were co-founding the statewide Kentucky Fairness Alliance together, and Marta was living in Rockcastle County and in Eastern Kentucky. And Marta's going to speak from her experiences as a rural-based Afro-Caribbean queer woman, and who helped launch statewide organizing for LGBTQ liberation. So welcome, Marta.
Thank you, Pam, and thank you for everyone for creating such a rich context for us to be able to tell the story, the amazing story of progressive politics and radical feminist work and action in Kentucky. I was here during I was 24, and it was palpable, the story of the Lexington Six and the power and boldness of the women who wrapped their arms around these women as well. And you know, I came out as bisexual at the time, and cut my hair and let my hair grow, let my armpit and my hair grow, and proceeded to learn a lot about what it meant to be a radical lesbian feminist. I went to the Michigan's Festival, did all of that. So all of that happened as a result of the rich community, lesbian community in Lexington. Then I left for Florida so that I could get clean and sober, as well as finish graduate school, and then proceeded to come back in 1994 and bought a little log cabin in Rockcastle County. I identify as Cuban-Latin, Cuban by birth and Appalachian by the grace of God. I found my Cuban rural roots there. And the Kentucky Fairness Alliance you know, we had done fairness in Louisville, and I had been part of that a little bit, but not a lot. But then they decided that we needed to go beyond Louisville and do, you know, rural organizing. And what happened was that I was co-chair of the Kentucky Fairness Alliance with the beautiful Ben. And we, while living in Rockcastle County, I wanted 0.3 pivotal pieces of organizing in rural counties that we did as part of the Kentucky Fairness Alliance that I was involved in and helped to facilitate that. One was the We Are Family campaign. And we went, and my lover at the time was a photographer, is a photographer, and we took pictures of queer folks in all areas of Eastern Kentucky, driving a tractor, singing at the African-American church chorus, etc. My nephew, my lover, and I took pictures at the local volunteer fire department and put We're Family on it. And then we took those pictures and we took them to Frankfurt, and we lined the halls where the all of the legislators had to walk through to be able to get to chambers so that they could see queer Kentuckians on the wall. And in the Fairness Office, we call that, formally is the We Are Family campaign. Informally, it was Find a Queer in the Picture, because, you know, there we were. So that was one piece that then we took to the Creating Change Conference, and then it became a travel exhibition through some of the universities, et cetera, to help educate and inform about you know, queer families in Kentucky, and I was very honored to be part of that. The second piece is, you know, the Creating Art Salon, and I got to thank Amber Moon for kind of putting that in me so early, how important music and poetry and art was. And we started to bring queer folks to perform from all over Kentucky at Art Salon, mimicked very much like the Gertrude Stein time, and folks read poetry and brought their art, and we had conversations about, you know, art as well as being out queers at the time. And we did that, and that was incredibly, a lot of community building, a lot of folks joined us and attended those pieces, even though we were in Rockcastle County and in Richmond, Kentucky, and in Berea, and in Owensboro, and in Henderson, Kentucky, etc. So I loved, my lover used to say, can you take those stickers off your car when you go out there organizing through the rest of Kentucky? And I just loved being in the middle of Appalachia as a brown queer woman, talking to folks about what we were about, and that was inspiring. And the last piece that I'll share is, I don't know if you remember, but part of our story is also the incredible church burnings in the South. And the group that we were doing Eastern organizing in rural areas, particularly Rockcastle County, and the hotbed of that movement, we decided to collect funds, and we decided to buy supplies and to go through these very conservative Christian fire and brimstone Black churches who were being defaced and burned, and go as queer people, bringing them supplies and bringing them money and saying, you know, we are your brothers and sisters in the struggle. We stayed for some of the sermons, and some of the sermons we got offended, and some of us stayed and some of us left, but we were able to represent the queer community and say, this is wrong, and we stand with you. So painting and bringing supplies and having those dialogues with folks who felt we were the sinners and should die was incredibly powerful. So those three pieces I want to highlight as part of the rural organizing around the Kentucky Fairness Alliance while I was co-chair of that movement. Thank you for having me here. I am a proud 67-year-old senior citizen, and this is a rich part of our story. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. You know, when in thinking about this conversation tonight, I was remembering in the mid-90s when there were 28 anti-gay pieces of legislation passed, and we formed the Kentucky Fairness Alliance, that a legislator from your county
Yes,
got
11 calls
to stop the discrimination against people. And he could not believe that people were calling him
Right.
in support of queer people. And so he actually reversed the count and reported that he had gotten 11 calls, to support the discriminatory legislation. So we had to definitely correct him on that. But I think it does, like, that story pushes us to think about, like, where hopes and possibilities lie, where the challenges are and where the hopes and possibilities lie as well. Thank you, Marta. We're going to wrap up our panel by coming down the road to Louisville, and we'll hear from Aletha Fields. I want to acknowledge that here in this area, we're on Shawnee, Osage, and Cherokee ancestral lands. Aletha is a poet, award-winning public high school teacher and community leader. And for a number of years, Aletha co-chaired the steering committee of the Fairness Campaign. And Aletha, please share with us some of your experiences in the fairness work and about organizing, and also just about community life for you in general. And welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Josephine, for your beautiful work. It's seminal work that's a part of our critical history. Thank you, Cate, for being here, and the other panelists. Thank you, Pam. And thank you, Sinister Wisdom, Julie, for putting this on so we could represent Appalachia and what's going on here. Well, I came to the Fairness Campaign in 1998. I was newly out. And I saw a rally across the street from my house, and it was called Love Makes a Family. And I had just learned what the rainbow flag was. And so I pulled my baseball cap down way over my eyes and pulled my ponytail out the back and went over there and ran into Lisa Gunterman from the Fairness Campaign. And she connected me with Fairness, whom I had watched for years on TV, being defeated by hateful lawmakers at what was known as the Board of Aldermen at the time. So I began to volunteer. I did my fair share of licking envelopes and phone banking and things like that, and eventually became the co-coordinator. We do a co-coordinator model at the Fairness Campaign. But during my time of learning more about being an activist with the Fairness Campaign, it was a beautiful education. And part of that was learning about intersectionality. And so we were very focused on intersectionality. At the time we had a graph up, and it was a circle and it had arrows in it. And we had racism, we had classism, sexism, homophobia. It was about intersectionality. So the Fairness Campaign was very intentional about how we move forward and what the model was going to look like. It was very inclusive. It was groundbreaking work. Like Pam said, we got some of our protections before New York City did, before Chicago and places like that, because of our intentionality. Part of that intentionality was building reciprocal relationships with different organizations. So we had the Kentucky Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. We had Song Southerners on New Ground. We had the Louisville Youth Group. We had the Kentucky Fairness Alliance and several other community organizations that were either close to becoming progressive, wanting to do the right thing and not quite sure how to do that. And Fairness really led the charge on that, of helping groups reach their goals in justice work. And so the Fairness Campaign did a whole lot of work around organizing different actions across the broader progressive community. We hosted many events right there in our office. I don't know how we got all those people in that space, but we always did. And there was always room for one more. And at that office, we have and still have a beautiful library of books that you can learn about history and different things in queer life. We were a hub for resources for groups and individuals. We sent folks to Creating Change every year. They come back and put on workshops and things like that. We always had activist trainings. And so we were very intentional as an organization about what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. And we weren't going to leave anyone out. There were legislators who would say things like, if you could just leave trans people out, this will really pass, but we're not comfortable with trans. And we're like, we're not going forward without trans people. So that's a non-negotiable. We never budged on that. And that is something that I am very proud of about the Fairness Campaign. We hosted the Kentucky Leadership Conference. And so that's where I learned a lot about political leverage and how we could support people who were running for office, political office, who were allies or who didn't know they were allies. And we beat down their doors until we got those yeses to pass the Fairness Campaign and the Fairness Ordinance. And then we also had those actions around the sunset of our Fairness Ordinance, and we had to go back to battle. It took 9 years to get the Fairness Ordinance, but they never gave up. Those that came before me, my foreparents, one of which is Pam McMichael on today's broadcast. My foreparents were fearless, they were wise, they were open, they listened, and they also led the way. And there were some non-negotiables such as intersectionality and things like that. So the work that has happened in Louisville with the Fairness Campaign has now branched across the state. And we have been able to continue to support groups who want to have fairness ordinances, such as, who knew, Vico, Kentucky? I mean, who knew this beautiful little spot inside of our state? And so we're proud of that work and proud of what we'll continue to do. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Aletha. We have a moment for maybe one question, Julie, or I know, Marta, you were putting something in the chat. I don't know if you want to just
I just wanted to say that it was really clear that the Fairness Campaign drew a line in the sand around trans, around organizing around race, and we lost money. We lost particularly affluent, privileged young queer men who only wanted to work towards repealing the sodomy laws that still existed in Kentucky. And not to do intersectional work and anti-racism work. And we lost money and they walked out the door. And the line was, what are we gonna do next? Save the whales. And I said, if they're queer, purple and polka dot, you bet. That cost us about $40,000 that night, which that was a lot of money at that time. But we never wavered, and fairness has always been where we've had the conversations around racism as well as trans, and we were going to take longer, but we were not leaving any one of us behind, and I continue to be very proud of that.
Thank you.
So
go ahead, Julie.
Yeah. So Chris Anderson asked, for Josephine, who are the two lesbian fugitives? What happened to them and where are they now? And so I want to let Josephine kind of respond to that, and maybe also tell us what do you think the end result was for the resistance to the grand jury? Like did we stop the kind of using the grand jury for investigative purposes, or is that still work to be done?
Well, there were some reforms that were introduced. There were congressional committees that investigated the whole issue of grand jury abuse, and but I'm not a lawyer, but I believe the system is still pretty well intact, and that frankly, you know. It might be an issue for people to think about, because I think the grand juries are still operating as a vehicle to coerce testimony, and it seems to me that that is not a proper function for the grand jury. I mean, I think they're still doing that. So in that sense, I don't know that there was any great dramatic reform of the grand jury system per se.
Thank
But
you.
I was pleased to hear what the effect was in the Lexington community, which I left Lexington actually in 1975. So that story remained an inspiration to people in the community, I think is really makes me happy.
That's great. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you, Julie, and thanks to everyone. Thanks to the panelists, and thanks to everybody for being here. And Julie, do you want me to move us to the song? Or yeah, again, there's just so much richness in the chat and in the conversation, feeling so appreciative for this conversation, and definitely living in a time where we need each other and need to have each other's backs. And so one of the, it's been a fun experience for me to be on the Sinister Wisdom as a participant in many of these programs. And here, Julie always closes a Sinister Wisdom program with your girlfriend's song, The L Word. And Carol Kramer, the songwriter and singer on that song, was hoping to be on with us tonight. I'm not sure if she still is. She's recently become the adoptive parent, her wife of the medically complex child. So I didn't see them when I checked a moment ago. We were going to bring Carol on and say hello because her song has wrapped up Sinister Wisdom programs for a while now. And the rap words from a political speech in that song is my voice and my words from a march here in Louisville in the 90s. And so it's always been fun and energizing to be part of these Sinister Wisdom programs and then to close with that. So this is the point where Julie's going to ask everybody to dance, and we're going to wrap up this in a celebratory celebration dance and a celebration of that song. And so Julie, back to you. And again, thanks everybody.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Here's the song. When it ends, I end the Zoom.
Come on and say the L word. It's the only chance you got to reclaim our name and not live in shame to try to improve our lot. Come on and say the L word. It's the only chance you got to stop the lying
Thank you all. We'll see you in 2 weeks for our next event.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. It was so great seeing everybody dancing. Spotlight was awesome, Julie.
Awesome. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Julie.
And different
Bye.
Hey, everybody.